Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. Happy New Year. We begin 2017 with a look ahead to what's in store for our nation. We've gathered 4 authors who've written about the many faces of America, about the differences that divide us, as well as the common experiences that can unite us as one. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Isabel Wilkerson is the author of The Warmth of Other Suns, a history of the great migration of African Americans from the rural South to the industrial North in the 20th century. J.D. Vance has written Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of his upbringing in the Rust Belt heartland, the part of the country that proved crucial to Donald Trump's electoral victory. Diane Guerrero is the author of In the Country We Love, a memoir of her experience as the child of undocumented immigrants who were deported when she was a teenager. She's an actor. You might recognize her from the Netflix series Orange is the New Black, and has served President Obama as an ambassador for citizenship and naturalization. And Amani Al-Khatahtbeh is the author of Muslim Girl, A Coming of Age, about life as a Muslim woman in the aftermath of 9/11. She's also the creator of the MuslimGirl.com website that showcases the writing of her fellow Muslim millennials. Thank you all for being here to share your parts of the American experience. JD, I'm going to start with you. You call yourself a hillbilly. What is a hillbilly?
Well, I think it's somebody with some attachment to the broad region of Appalachia, whether they grew up there like my grandparents or sort of are the descendants of people who migrated from there. And of course, it's a pejorative in some ways if it's used by people on the outside, but as Mamaw, as I called my grandma, always said, if it's used by people inside the family, then it's okay.
Diane, you say, you write in your book, deported. Long before I fully understood what that word meant, I'd learned to dread it.
Yeah, it was a topic of conversation in my household every day. And since I was a kid, I mean, my parents didn't shield me from it at all because I had to be prepared and aware of the possibility of them being deported one day. And so I lived my life that way.
And Amani, you write that you were 9 years old after 9/11. And it was obviously traumatic for the nation, but what was it like for your family?
Well, I mean, that year was the same year that I heard my first racial slur. So it was definitely a very huge turning point for my family. Our house got TP'd and egged. The flea market where my dad worked launched a petition to kick all the Muslim vendors out. And it ended up resulting in my family and I moving to Jordan for a short period of time. And I discovered in writing the book that my dad did so to shield us from Islamophobia.
And Isabel, let me ask you, you write about the Great Migration, so much that was changed in America as a result of that, everything from jazz to the blues to the way the neighborhoods are designed. This line really stood out to me, though, and more than that, it was the first big step the nation's servant class ever took without asking. How does that start? How did this millions of people moving, why did it start?
Well, I think that, first of all, any migration is not really about migration. It's about freedom and how far people are willing to go to achieve it, which is what binds all of us together as Americans, if you think about it. But this great migration that I've written about gives you a window into a caste system that existed in the South and actually radiates also throughout our culture and even into the North. And in that world, it was actually against the law for a black person and a white person to merely play checkers together. You could go to jail. It was against the law for African Americans to pass a white motorist on the road. These are examples of the arcane nature of the caste system that we live with even to this day in many respects.
Amani, let me ask you, you moved away because of Islamophobia, and then the family came back. Why?
My family ended up coming back because my mom became ill while we were in Jordan, so we wanted to reunite the family here. But I think that experience really opened my eyes to the stark contrast between reality in the Middle East, how things were on the ground, as compared to how they were being misrepresented in Western media. And upon my return, that was kind of my personal goal was, oh my God, I have to open people's eyes to this. You know, I have to do something to kind of create change in that way. And then also, when I returned from Jordan, I was wearing a headscarf, which was a huge difference for me because I noticed a major shift in the way that people treated me, the way that my friends regarded me, and the way that total strangers would behave towards me in public.
Diane, when you write about growing up in a family where you were always under this, because of your parents were undocumented, this kind of sense of fear, that word deported always hanging over. What did the American dream look like from inside of that growing up period?
A path for citizenship, immigration reform. I always hoped that my parents could find that, so that we could stay together, and I always hoped that we wouldn't be separated. I mean, and then we were.
The American dream was basically just citizenship.
It was just, it was very simple. It was just staying together. Yeah. Sometimes it's as basic as that.
JD, you say in the introduction of the book, you write that those of us lucky enough to live the American dream, the demons of life that we left behind continue to chase us. What does that mean?
Well, for me, it means that you don't just all of a sudden get maybe money or a nice credential, and all of a sudden everything that you learned, every habit you acquired, every familiar relationship that you had just sort of goes away, because both the people that upward mobility brings you in contact with, whether it's professors or new social circles, but also the people who you moved away from in some ways, they continue to pull and push in different ways. And so you always feel, in some ways, I think, like you've left people that you love the most behind, but also that you're not totally an insider in this new place that you've joined.
Right. Your history is always attached to you.
Yeah, absolutely, and you want it to be attached to you. That's the contradiction, right? Is you don't want to leave that behind, but you also recognize that that history makes you a little bit different to some of the people that you're coming in contact with.
Isabel, does that sound familiar to the thousands of people that you interviewed, that feeling of having a history in one place, but being, as you said, desperately anxious to get away from that place?
Absolutely. When these people left, they went along beautifully predictable streams of migration, which is what immigrants do throughout the world. They had to plan and strategize in order to leave. It was also often difficult and dangerous for them to leave the Jim Crow South, because there were efforts to keep them there, because they've served as the backbone of the economy, and they often were faced with violence and arrest if they sought to board some of those northbound trains. So when they left, they had to experience great dislocation and then try to find and make a way for themselves in these alien, big cities of the North and the Midwest and West, and many of them carried the same the culture with them.
I was struck when you talked about the American dream. You said by their actions, they did not dream the American dream. They willed it into being by a definition of their own choosing. This idea that the American dream is not something you sort of are on your drive to, but something you have to make yourself.
That is a critical part of the line in the book, because this is the only group of Americans that had to act like immigrants in order to be recognized as citizens. And their dreams and their goals and what they were leaving for and what they were hoping for is the same thing that any American has ever lived on this soil has wanted. And I think that the goal that we are facing right now is to see our shared humanity. And we talk a lot about diversity, but I think we should talk more about commonality. I think we're very aware of the things that make us different. I don't think we realize enough what makes us the same and what makes our hearts beat the same, and the things that we want are so similar.
I'm going to give you a snap for that.
Thank you.
I love that.
Thank you.
I love that. Thank you.
Let's see if we can put together a collection of things that we would say make us all similar across these different experiences.
Well, I think we all want to be happy. And I think that, I don't think we should look at equality as oppression. I think that's what we're all struggling for. Is to be equal, to be recognized as that we're all in this place together and going through the same things. I love my family.
Right.
That's one thing.
Yeah, family. JD, families. You write a lot about family, although some incredible family ties, such strength that and bonds and rules and code. And you talked about hillbilly justice, and yet on the other hand, conflict within family.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think of it that really ties us together is something aspirational about being an American, right? So whether you're a Black American moving from the rural South, or from South America, or from an Islamic country, like whether it's our parents, our grandparents, or even further back, it's this idea that we want something better for our kids than we have right now. And there's this sense, I think, that's built into the whole idea of the pursuit of happiness, right? That we're going to keep getting better, things are going to keep on improving. I think, frankly, a lot of the problems we have in our politics are in some ways rooted in different groups thinking that things aren't continuing to get better. I think that pessimism, that cynicism is a real problem in our politics and our society more broadly.
Is that something everybody signs up to, the idea that things can get better? Or there is some skepticism among some groups in America that the idea of hope and the next generation is going to be better is a dream and an idea that only a certain class or a certain kind of America can have.
As long as we continue to give space to voices that are underrepresented or might be marginalized in these conversations, especially conversations that focus on them, in which they are usually neglected from, I think that will allow us to really just make those commonalities more apparent. I'm so curious to know whether you grew up with any Muslim friends, right? Because there have been so many polls that a majority of Americans have never met a Muslim person or haven't had a Muslim friend before. A lot of them from the greater Appalachian region, a lot of them who voted in the next president on policies that he's been, parading around about the Muslim community. So it's like, for a lot of people, we just aren't able to humanize each other.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And to answer your question, the answer is no, not until I went to college did I actually meet a Muslim American. And to your point, part of it is just because we were so regionally isolated, right? There were basically three groups of people that I saw growing up. The people who were like me, the middle-class white people, and maybe the working-class black people who lived in my city. And that was pretty much it. And, there's a lot of evidence that when people actually spend time around people who are different from them, a lot of these biases and a lot of this frustration sort of fades away. And that's a problem with the fact that we're so isolated right now.
And then there's this fear of losing something, instead of seeing this as an opportunity to gain so much by uniting, by seeing that if we all sort of, kind of lived in a more balanced world, that it would be better for all of us. And that no one's here to take anything away from you.
All right, we're going to pause right there. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a minute with our panel. And we're back with our panel of authors. Amani, I want to talk to you about this notion of stories. There is this balance between how much of the old do I hold on to and how much of the new do I embrace. Is there any of that in your experience where you looked at your own family and thought, gee, they need to assimilate a little more?
I don't think that I have ever looked at my family from a place of they need to change. But of course, growing up immediately after 9/11 through the height of Islamophobia, it did cause a lot of discomfort for me as a child. I remember that summer, right? I was 9 years old, like right after 9/11 happened. And my dad, he had a store on the Jersey Shore. So we decided to go to the water park one day. And my aunt, who was a Muslim woman visiting from Jordan for the first time, she was visiting the United States, she decided to come with me. And she comes on to the tallest water rafting slide in the entire park, fully clothed in her Islamic outfit, from head to toe covered. All of the families, of course, predominantly white, were just like staring at us in like sheer confusion and possibly horror, like what is going on here? And I just remember in that moment wanting to disappear. Like I could not wait to rush down the slide and then run off the boardwalk and then go to my dad and tell him, oh my God, do you understand what my aunt just put me through, But when I told my dad, he looked back at me and he said, wow, that was pretty cool of her, wasn't it? That took a lot of strength. That took a lot of guts.
JD, you would talk about feeling like a tourist at Yale, but then now when you go home, you feel like an outsider. So you're caught between.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like an outsider at home. Sometimes I probably feel more at home there than I will at Yale. I remember when I went home, and it was actually the first time that I had introduced my now wife, but then girlfriend, to my family. We were at a gas station in Middletown, and I had on a Yale t-shirt, and a woman at the pump next to mine said, oh, did you go to Yale? My nephew goes there too, or my son or something. And I had this really intense moment of cultural conflict in my mind, and I'm thinking, well, if I fess up to being a Yaley, then she'll think I'm an outsider. She'll sort of, maybe if she's from the Yale side of the divide, she'll judge me and say, oh, look at this simpleton from Middletown, Ohio. But of course that was stupid because I was in Middletown, Ohio. So I looked at her and I said, no, but my girlfriend does. And then I got in my car and drove away because I didn't want to admit to having gone to an Ivy League school back home.
Well, if I had gone to Yale, I'd say I'd gone to Yale.
All right, well, you can say for the purposes of the show that you went
I
to
went
Yale.
to Yale.
See, now you're right in the mainstream there. Let me ask you a question about hope, because you write in your book, someone once said that hope is the best medicine. In our family, in our community, in that attorney's office, hope wasn't just the finest remedy. It was the only one we knew. You talk about hope, but tell the story about that attorney that your father went to try to get legal status, and what happened?
So this lady had given us a card and said, like, this person is helping people with their green cards, and you know, people who've had worse situations than you guys. And so we went to this attorney, and my dad had high hopes, and he was desperate at this point. And we gave him money. He said he could help, and he stopped calling. And we went back, and his office was gone.
Wow.
Everything was gone. And that was a breaking point for my father, and that was sort of the beginning of sort of the end of our family unit. And I was there with him. I was there with him every step of the way, and it was heartbreaking because we, you know, it could have been a lack of education. It could have been hope. It was our last string of hope, and we just held on to it. Maybe this will be the day. Maybe this will be the time that things do go well for us. And it didn't happen. And so we just sort of, everything sort of collapsed after that. But my parents always taught me to have hope and to dream, and that's why I think I've made it. From whatever happened to my family, I think that's why I'm here, sitting with you here, because I have held on to that humanity, or to my dreams, or to that things are going to get better. And if I do try really hard, and if I participate and I do my part, then maybe something good can happen.
Does that sound familiar, Isabel, to the people who I mean, the migration leaving the South? Obviously, hope was part of it, was leaving the Jim Crow, but part of it was also that hope. And the hope in the things unseen.
Yes, well, hope and desperation, and a desire to be recognized as citizens in the country that they had helped to build. African Americans, you know, have been on this soil since 1619, longer than many, many people who are currently here. And yet when they migrated out to what they hoped would be freedom, they were met with tremendous hostility and resentment. There's a story out of Chicago in which this family tried to find a home, make a home in a place called Cicero. And when they moved in, it turned out that that the people who were living in that neighborhood rushed the building, and they tore out all of the fixtures, threw out the piano, threw out the sofa, threw out even the faucet and sinks from the walls. And then after they did that, they burned the building, which meant that even the residents who were white were left homeless. This is what happened in the 20th century. I mean, this happened within the lifespan of people alive today in the 1950s, and that is what they were met with. And we still in this country live with the after effects of that level of unresolved history, unresolved resentments, unresolved and misunderstandings of who we are and what we all want for ourselves.
You've all written books about trying to get people to understand something that they are not familiar with. That's not an easy thing to do. JD, when you wrote your book, what was the reaction to that?
Yeah, by and large, I thought the reaction has been pretty positive. And one of the things I was worried about when I wrote the book, you know, there's this classic hillbilly stereotype, this sort of toothless guy playing the banjo from Deliverance, that I really wanted to present a different image of what I thought my particular culture represented. And that, of course, was most embodied by Mamaw. And folks have responded pretty positively to her. They tell me that they think she's a hero, or that she's a very powerful, funny woman.
This is your grandmother.
That's right.
Yeah.
And of course, that's how I feel about her. And I'm glad that people have that reaction to her, because I think that she's much more representative of what I saw back home than maybe what the stereotype is.
Amani, what has your reaction been to people who can reach out to you through MuslimGirl.com and ask questions? And do you find people seeking understanding? What's the reaction been?
Absolutely. I think that people are always fascinated that my mom chooses not to wear a headscarf while I do, or my dad, who is a Muslim father, was very encouraging of me and was the one that pushed me forward my entire life. Things that clash with stereotypes or preconceived notions that they have about how Muslims really are. But mostly, I think that people have been surprised that things are really this bad for us. Especially as a Muslim woman, especially for Muslim women who choose to cover, we're one of the most visible religious minorities in the country. And as such, we're literally the lightning rods for a lot of this hateful rhetoric that's happening on a national scale. So for me, my whole goal has been just to show how that hateful rhetoric doesn't happen in a vacuum. It trickles down, and it impacts our livelihoods. It results in a real life or death crisis for a lot of us. I think that that's something that a lot of people had difficulty grasping before they read the book.
What about you, Diane? Did you similar experience, and what was the reaction to your book?
Well, at first I feel it was so surprising to me that people didn't really understand because I feel like immigration and immigrants are so embedded in this country's fabric. Yeah. So for me, it was like, what do you mean you didn't know? And I got some hateful stuff, but I think for the most part, I think people are really supportive and understanding, and they don't believe that 11 million people should be deported or families should be separated. And I think there's a minority who feel that way, who fear the growing diversity or fear maybe a path for citizenship, or all these notions of people just rushing this country. And but I don't think they understand that what we really want is a path for citizenship for the people who are here and an updated visa system. So these are things that people didn't really understand, but I think that we're starting to have more conversation. And I know this year has been tough for a lot of people. Everyone's like, not really happy with 2016. I know it's been a tough year, but I think,
riddance.
Yeah, right. Goodbye. But I think it's opened up dialogue, and I think that for that we need to be grateful. And now we just more than ever need to move forward and have these conversations and keep having them.
And Isabel, what's the reaction been to your book since you wrote it?
One of the purposes of the work that I did was to reach the human heart. I mean, I really believe that the heart is the last frontier. I was actually at had a book event on Long Island, and it was a rainy, miserable day, but lots of people had come out, and at the end of it, there was a signing line. At the front of the signing line was this diminutive grandmotherly figure, and her eyes had already been welling with tears as she stood before me. She said, if I start talking about the book, I will cry for sure. She said, I can't talk about the book because the book is my story. You see, I'm an immigrant from Greece, and this book is my story. And hearing that from her was confirmation to me that the mission of this work was accomplished in some way, meaning that someone who had a completely different experience could see herself in people that many, that our culture would say she would have nothing in common with, but that she saw it, she felt it, and she was there standing before me, sharing with me that these were the stories of her own experience.
And thank you all for being here to help us share these stories and perhaps cross some boundaries. We'll be back in a moment.